Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching NDTV. The Supreme Court on Tuesday has urged the centre and the states to frame a policy to prevent exploitation of patients and families admitted in private hospitals, which often force them to buy medicines and medical devices from their own pharmacies or establishments in collaboration with them. Now, this was a bench that was headed by Justice Surya Kant, who said that government should also be sensitized about the unreasonable charges and exploitation that goes on in several private hospitals in the country. But the court has also cautioned governments from taking a very hardline or rigid position on this or unreasonable position on this against private hospitals. Remember, according to the Economic Survey 2024-2025, the out-of-pocket expenditure in healthcare, which basically refers to money that people pay directly from their pockets for medical services such as doctor visits or hospital stays, is around 39.4% in 2021-2022. It was almost 64% in 2013-2014. But the benchmark is still around 35%, which is why we need to do quite more in improving our public health infrastructure. So what is the Supreme Court asking the states today to come up with a policy to ensure patients are not exploited in private hospitals? What does this intervention mean? Is this a much needed move? Can there be a blanket policy? Is this also a call to ramp up our public health infrastructure? Because it's the shortages that often push even poor families to opt for private healthcare. Now, how serious is this problem? How will this impact private investors who often fill up the gaps when it comes to state medical care? This is what we try and discuss tonight. Joining me now is K. Sujata Rao, who's a former health secretary. We'll also have other guests, but first, thank you, Sujata ma'am, for joining me on this broadcast. We also have Dr. Anant Sharma, who's a national chairperson of Consumer Confederation of India. Thank you both of you for joining me on this broadcast. To you, Sujata ma'am, first. The hearing today was based on a writ petition which was filed by a petitioner in person, and I was looking at the petition today, and it says that the patient or the person felt he felt the brunt of the exploitation when a relative had undergone expensive treatment in a private hospital, and this is the experience that a lot of families in India go through. One surgery or even a prolonged hospitalization of just one family member can really impact a family's expense. How do you see the top court's intervention? Do you think that something like private hospitals, pharmacies, is it something that can be even regulated?
See, the sale of any drug above the MRP is illegal. There are already laws and they have to be enforced. So the Supreme Court is right in saying that what other law can they pass? So here the hospitals have their own pharmacies because that is a revenue center. They want people to buy drugs there, and that's how they make income. And they're charging more in order to make shore up more revenues. But it's totally illegal, and it's a government which can certainly take action with the drug controller of the state to see why drugs are being sold at a higher cost than what is given on the tablet. So there are laws, they just have to be enforced. But you might say, why they're not being enforced? That's because the weakest arm of government is the drug controller. There are personnel required to regulate pharmacies, and whether inside hospitals or outside are very, very few. We don't have enough drug inspectors. And that is one reason why they are not able to really enforce the laws.
Right.
That is the main issue.
Yeah, Dr. Anant Sharma, union government has also countered this, saying that the National Council for Clinical Establishments has minimum standards and mechanisms, and we hear of Jan Aushadhi stores or Amrit stores, and these are the stores that the government says already provide affordable medicines in government hospitals. But the centre has also taken a stand that there is no compulsion for patients to buy medicines and other things from hospitals or pharmacies that are linked to them. But do these approaches work? Because we all know that in private hospitals, everything happens through collaboration, and often the patient is left without any choice.
You're right, the exploitation and poor behavior towards consumers in private hospitals in India have become a serious issue. Many private hospitals suggest patients to unnecessary tests and medications, placing a heavy financial burden on them. Despite the poor quality of health care services, hospitals charge exorbitant fees, making it unbearable for lower and middle class families. In many cases, there is a lack of adherence to doctors' advice, and patients do not receive accurate information, leading to feeling of insecurity. Additionally, long waiting lines and delay in treatment have become commonplace. So the direction from the Supreme Court is a very good action, but there is a need to some more regulatory action. There is the lack of transparency in medical services and insensitivity towards patients in private hospitals is creating a significant crisis in the healthcare sector of India. To address this issue, the government need to implement strict regulation and policies to ensure that patients receive proper and respectful medical care. It is essential to ensure that healthcare services are accessible and safe for everyone. So the direction is good, but there is need to strict regulations also from the side of the governments at state level and at central level.
Right. Also, Sujata ma'am, when the Supreme Court is asking state governments to introduce a policy to check overpricing of medicines and also medical devices at private hospitals, what should the states need to do next? Do you think that they can actually assess the situation, introduce a policy asking hospitals not to force patients to buy essential medical items from their in-house pharmacies? Do you think policies like this can be worked out? And also, we know that patients often are left without a choice. How do these practices get effectively regulated and enforced by state governments?
That no patient can be forced by any private establishment to get the X-ray done in his own laboratory or buy a drug from his own pharmacy. That way the government is correct in saying there's absolutely no way that they can be forced to do that. But the point, as you know, is the doctor will not accept an X-ray taken in another lab saying that I can't trust this lab. So, it's all an issue of accreditation and saying that if it's from a properly accredited laboratory, the doctor cannot cannot refuse the patient. The medical devices part is a slightly more difficult, but on drugs, where that is concerned, as I said earlier, there are already laws and they're enforced. So if any complaint comes that this person is charging more than the MRP, you can take action and you can seal that whole pharmacy in that hospital. So, it's a question of enforcing laws. You have any number of regulations, but you have to enforce them. And for that, you need personnel and you need oversight. And that is the problem, that if you have private sector, you have to have extremely good governance. If you are weak in governance, private sector will definitely exploit you and gouge you.
That's a very valid point. Also, Dr. Sharma, I know that medical facilities are a right to life is very important, but when it comes to fair pricing, do customers have the right to fair pricing? I'm sure that this is not an issue that is new. I'm sure courts have intervened in this aspect even in the past. What is the precedent that you think of? Do you expect any positive results from the court's intervention today?
It's depend on the behavior of the state government, the administrative action, and also in the behavior of the consumers. Because as per the Consumer Protection Act, it is the right to choose is the right of consumers, and nobody can enforce to purchase any product from anywhere compulsorily. So as per the Consumer Protection Law, hospital cannot force to purchase the medicines, drugs, or any other equipments from hospital. But in practical, there is many problems, and they force indirectly, and they not gives the transparency. They not gives the prescriptions to patients. So there is a legal provision available. Consumer can go to the consumer commissions at a state level, national level, district level, and get a compensation also. In several cases where medical negligence cases are coming, consumer is getting the compensation. On the same, the issue that they are charging more than MRP, it is purely illegal, and I think that they are not charging more than MRP. But the MRP is very heavy, and in market, if we can compare, the rates is low, and they are charging on MRP, and MRP is very high with the 500%, 700 profits. If they charge more than MRP, it is illegal, and consumer can immediately file a complaint. But issue is not that they are charging more than MRP. They are charging on MRP, but in market, comparatively, the drugs are available in very low cost compared to the MRP. That is the main issue.
Also, last word from Sujata ma'am. you talked about the private sector. What happens in certain cases where private sectors play an important role in ensuring supply of certain critical drugs? I know that governance is very important, like you rightly pointed out, wherever the private sector is involved. But with an intervention like this, what kind of impact do you see on private investors who also play a critical role in our health systems?
You know, it's a very dicey situation because the private sector is very strong in their lobbies. And today, because the public sector, we have not been investing enough and adequately, the fallback position, if a private sector refuses to provide services and goes, say, on strike or whatever, is weak in some states. Now, in Karnataka, I'll just give you a quick example. Karnataka, they brought a law where they insisted that every private sector should display the rates of all the tests and all the procedures that they are providing, and have it on public display so that patients can choose where it is much cheaper for them to go, where it's more convenient, and so on. The entire private sector resisted and they went on strike. But then nothing really happened because the public sector in Karnataka was so strong that they could have a fallback position of saying, patients, come to our hospital and we'll treat you. The government hospitals in Karnataka have equally good quality service. So finally, the private sector had to give in. But then at the same time, no government can have them. You have to negotiate a position. Finally, the end story is that the act was dropped.
Okay.
So it is very important for government to have a negotiation, a system of negotiating with the private sector and get them to enforce. Government has a right to say that these are the prices you shall charge, but they need to be negotiated and enforced thereafter, you know.
Okay.
So that is, right now we don't have any law to say you have to display the rates, though it is in the Clinical Establishment Act. But, the enforcement part becomes weak because we are not in a position to bargain hard enough with the private sector.
Right. So an implementation
which is obviously
is the
holding
key.
us to ransom in a way.
Right.
Yeah.
The court's intervention could just be a starter to something new and interesting. Thank you both of you
Yes.
for joining me on this broadcast. In an interesting move, the Supreme Court on Tuesday has called on state governments to introduce a policy to check overpricing of medicines and medical devices at private hospitals. But can such practices be effectively regulated and enforced? We'll have to wait and watch as to how states respond to this and how much they are willing to implement.